frequent comment I get when I'm streaming, sometimes on my YouTube videos and sometimes even in my DMs on Discord, is that players have a lot of nerves trying to get into Mythic Plus. Sometimes it's just the nerves of trying to push higher. Maybe this is their first 2k, 2.5k, or maybe finally in 3k club. Sometimes it's just nerves getting started with the Mythic Plus journey in the first place, worried about how they will perform, especially in front of others. As someone who has coached and commentated esports for a while now, I'll be the first to tell you that this stage fright or performance anxiety is absolutely normal and something I have a lot of advice on tackling. My name is BowserTheHealer, and let's get right into this one. So if you like WoW content, hey, get subscribed, it'd mean a lot to me, or if you just like listening to me talk about World of Warcraft, hey, appreciate you. Stage fright or performance anxiety can usually be dealt with a few ways. There are emotional parts to this, but there are mechanical parts as well. I want to start with the mechanical side of M+, discussing the performance expectations of players in M+, before tackling the more emotional side of this, because I personally find with most performance anxiety, having a grounded expectation of performance will make tackling the emotional sides of this much easier. So let's start with that performance culture of Mythic Plus. On a basic level, most of you already know, Mythic Plus is just about running dungeons by taking out all the bosses, getting enough mobs to satisfy the percent requirement, all under the time limit. It has infinite scaling difficulty, so it can start quite beginner friendly and end at professional play at the world record level. Your team will likely be 1 tank, 3 DPS, and 1 healer. There are responsibilities for everyone and each role, and I have 3 key points that are everyone's responsibilities. Pause the video if you like and see if you can guess. The first responsibility is your own health bar. Healers are there to catch you if you fall and if teams make mistakes, but players are equipped with self-heals and defensives. You don't need to be an expert at these to start, but it's good to know where you have them keybound and when a good time to use them is by experimenting early on. And as a good rule, remember that higher key levels hurt more. So if something did half your life bar in a +4, it's gonna really hurt in a +8. The second responsibility is stops and interrupts. I can and probably will make an entire video about this, but stops are crowd control options like knockups, stuns, disorients, fears, etc. Interrupts are the moves that specifically say that they interrupt a spell and prevent that school of magic from being used for a few seconds. Yellow or colorful cast bars are the ones that can be interrupted or kicked, as it is known as. Interrupting or kicking a move is different than hitting a stop, as crowd control does not lock down schools of magic. Some moves have no cooldown and thus they'll keep casting them the moment they're available again, which is why locking down a school of magic will turn off that move for a little bit. And some moves can't be interrupted, that can only be stopped. So keep your interrupts and crowd control buttons nearby and learn what mobs are actually susceptible to stops and whatnot. The third and final piece of responsibilities are mechanics. I know this one gets memed about a lot, but it is on everyone to be responsible for mechanics. If you get targeted with a bomb, a defensive mechanic, etc., it's up to you to solve it. Some mechanics are for specific people, like they only target tanks or the DPS, or they only target healers. Sometimes it's non-tank targets, and there are even just ones that are ranged or melee mechanics. And some mechanics are best done by healers, like certain dispeller healing checks, or in Noku Defensive, which has 2 very good examples. The first boss in Noku Defensive has this wipe mechanic, and you use a ballista to stop the boss from casting the wipe mechanic. Now, anyone can do this mechanic, but if the tank does it, they'll drag the boss all over the place. If the DPS do it, that's fine, but they'll lose uptime on the boss, as in they'll have to stop doing damage to turn around and activate a ballista. But the healer, well, the healer actually has some free time. There is some damage to heal through, but they have A, plenty of time to do that, and B, after they activate the ballista and stop the mechanic, they can walk back and continue helping with damage or finish healing people up. So it makes more sense to have the healer do it so that the DPS can continue to do damage, which means the boss will die faster. But then, equally as important, the second boss of Noku Defensive, the Storm Elemental, this boss drops these balls of electricity and they are going to give you a damage and a healing amp. The problem is that a lot of DPS players sometimes think that, oh, well, I want those, I want to do more damage. You do, and that's good, but there's also a heal check on this fight, and a pretty heavy one at that. So to make sure you survive the healing check, make sure your healer actually gets a good amount of those balls before each wave of damage, and the first one comes up early. Mechanics are for everyone. Make sure you're assisting your healer as much as you're assisting yourself. And then, of course, each role has its own specific responsibilities. Tanks lead the group through the dungeon, grabbing enemies and keeping threat on them so they don't kill a DPS or a healer. Use your defensives and keep yourself alive. The healer will be there if you fall down. You need to also learn the routes. And no, you can look up routes pretty easily. I recommend Raider.io for this, but there's no shame in asking where to go in lower level keys or in Mythic Zeros until you have them in memory. Also note that you can kind of freeball some of these routes and get the job done early on. DPS do damage, which, yeah, water's wet too, but there's a lot of nuance here. There are mechanics for DPS like when ads spawn or priority targets that absolutely must die, but there's also damage profiles for the DPS. The typical ones are single target, 2 to 3 target cleave, and 4+ target AoE. Each spec handles these differently. Some specs excel at single target or at priority target damage, while others do massive damage in 8+ giant target packs. So learn what your rotation is in your cooldowns for specific damage profiles and what moves you should be using on those target counts. Healers are the last bastion of defense, keeping people alive and making it through healing mechanics, and when there isn't much to do, also helping out with damage. Which, if you're on the newer side, don't worry too much about the damage. As you get better as a healer, the opportunity to do damage will just present itself. You'll have free time, use it to blast. But much like DPS, each healer heals differently with a mix of single target, cleave, and AoE healing. And in addition, each healer is some mix of reactionary healing and preparation healing. So it's important to learn how you can effectively heal different scenarios and how you can do so without destroying your mana bar. Now, onto Mythic Plus score and gear. There's a lot to talk about here, but I want to keep it simple. For score, running dungeons faster gets you more score up to a point. Even failing a key can still give you score. And no matter how fast you are, the next level of key will always reward more score. However, always remember, score is what gets you into keys. So running your key for initial score can be very useful if you don't have a group that's willing to run with you. Once you have score, it's easier to get into more keys on Group Finder, but if you reach too high for a key level that you haven't done, you likely won't get accepted. But unless you really want to solo pug all of this, find friends. There are keystone groups like the Dungeon Dojo, Mythic Plus recruitment discords, these places that can help you find your people. Even guilds are known for having key running groups or are dedicated to Mythic Plus, and learning with a group is way more fun. You can ask questions, learn together, fail together, and it makes a huge difference to talk about it with a bunch of friendly people rather than randos on the internet. And what kind of gear should you be getting and what gear level should you be for Mythic Plus? Well, depending on when you're watching this video, that number will change. For the release of this video in Season 4 of Dragonflight, 475 to 480 is a perfect starting point. But in later expansions and seasons, honestly, you can go into your trade chat in your local city, ask around, and you'll likely get the answer. And as for what kind of gear you should get, you'll hear me say this again later, but cross-reference guides. It's important to watch multiple people's videos, guides, etc., reading up on different various websites on what people are running to get a sense of what's important for your spec. And it's very different from spec to spec, so it is worth the time investment. Now, despite everything I just told you about item level, I did just make an alt that was doing keys at 450 item level with zero issue. This brings me to my next point about gear. Mythic Plus is more about skill. Sure, gear makes keys easier and can definitely get you into higher level content more easily, but learning how to play the dungeons, manage your responsibilities, play your specialization correctly, and work with teammates does so much more than gear score will. Well, to a point. This is why, if you're new, it's okay to just bounce around the lower key levels like 2s through 4s just to learn the dungeons. And when learning the dungeons, use the dungeon journal, which is Shift J by default, I believe, to read up on boss mechanics. It's easy to read, it's quick to read, and if you're trying to refresh yourself on mechanics, you can even just check the categories like what do I have to know as a DPS or a tank or as a healer. And I need to shout this one out probably 3 times as loud, but I won't for the sake of your ears. Please be real with yourself and your abilities. If you want the best gear, you will need to push keystone levels and get better at the game. If you want to be more relaxed and a bit more casual, it's okay to keep the level low and play how you like. But I often see players who don't want to play M+ at a high level but want the best gear. Be realistic about what your goals are. You definitely don't need to be full Mythic Trek gear to have fun in World of Warcraft. So play to where you are comfortable or to where you want to improve to. Now, for the hardest part that no one wants to hear, but The last and possibly most important part of this performance anxiety in gaming thing, learning to be vulnerable. Learning from failure is a skill, and being okay with making mistakes is not only hard, but extremely important to learn. And it's contrary to a lot of what I was taught growing up in my age bracket, because the best players, they didn't just walk into a high level key and time it. They climbed up, they got better, they learned their specs or knew their specs already in and out, and they've probably made a ton of mistakes on their way there. And excuse me if this is a bit more out of left for my YouTube videos, but I want you to go get your ass kicked. No, I'm not kidding. Tanks, go in there. Mess up your defensives. Let a DPS die from bad threat management. DPS players, be at the bottom of the meter, floor point of view, right? You stood on a swirly and you died because you were too focused on your buttons. Healers, it's okay to panic and have someone die. The reality is that sometimes we make mistakes, and the even bigger reality is that your teammates will absolutely also make mistakes. No, it's fine. Everything is fine. No, everything's fine. Use damage taken and death logs on details to go and see what happens. Double check what might have gone wrong. We don't get better without getting our hands dirty. Go make a mess of a key and learn from it. And if anyone's giving you a hard time, especially in like the +7 or lower category, being toxic or rude even in high level keys, I'll be the first to tell you, it's okay to leave. Even in +8s, where I expect players to kind of know the dungeons, I still calmly explain things to someone if they don't know them. Because while that video by Folding Ideas, It's Rude to Be Bad at World of Warcraft, has some excellent points and is an absolute banger of a video, it's not rude to be bad in a +2 or in a +8. If I'm being honest with you, it might be rude to be bad in a +10 or in especially a +15, where I definitely expect a player to know the mechanics, but sometimes we fail. Somebody got into a key level and they don't know all the mechanics that well, and we fail and we go next. If the people suck, if no one will explain to you what you did wrong and instead they're just flaming you, leave. Go. Get out of there. Most of my runs are with cool people. I've made tons of friends in Mythic Plus, but you are going to get some tough people. Leave them. And if you're still struggling, that idea of being vulnerable and failing is still choking you, you might just need to take the dive and be a bit scared. Go with friends, watch streamers and content creators do it, and take the leap. Cross-reference guides for your spec and your role. Double check your information, especially as the key levels get higher. I've been doing this forever. Even though I'm somebody who does a lot of my own theory crafting for preservation, I still cross-reference what other players are doing just to make sure I haven't missed anything obvious. No one should be doing it all on their own. Double check stuff, and trust me, you'll get there. And after all of that, if it's still really getting to you, talk to your close friends and family, maybe even a mental health professional if you have access to one. If it really bothers you this much in a video game, it often means it's gonna bother you in the real world too. And I think it's important to have those conversations. I always find though that video games, while they are played professionally, are also meant to be fun. And this tends to be the lowest risk environment to tackle those insecurities. So give it your best shot. And that's gonna do it for this one. If you have any other questions or worries, feel free to voice them down in the comments section, and I'll try to get to as many of you as possible. I'll be making other tutorials and guides in the coming days with any luck, but for now, I hope you all have a good one. Go get your ass kicked, and I'll see you all soon.